Hi, welcome back to Copic in the Craft Room. Michelle Houghton here, and we are going to be doing some airbrushing today. I have gone ahead and put a mask over the top of the ground area, and those are just some sticking post-it notes, extremely sticky. They're completely stuck to my table. These are ones that I actually can't find anymore, which I love, but they work really, really well for masking. And then I've got my stamp, which is from Stamp AnnieThing. I've got her all covered up with a mask as well, and that I just cut out and used some repositionable tape. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a sky, and I've got this just a piece of cardstock that I've kind of cut with a cloud pattern, and then I'm using a B52, and I'm holding it fairly far away, kind of obviously tipping it forward so I have that spray aimed at my card, and I'm pulling it further away as I get further away from the clouds. Now if I didn't want my hands to get inky, I'd need to do something different holding this down, and notice I'm not going super far over that right hand side. That's where my rainbow is going to be, and so I'm doing a little bit of blue over there, but not quite so much. So I'm going to take that blue out, and I'm putting an R29, readjusting. I have to pull that nib out just a little bit. I get ink all over my fingers. And then I'm pulling the bottom area off, and I'm literally just going to freehand this. So I'm starting at the bottom, doing a light brush and kind of swing stroke up. YR18 is next, and this is an experiment. I have never done this before. I haven't practiced this ahead of time, and so I know I'm probably going to make some mistakes along the way, but I really want the colors to actually blend together kind of where they're hitting. What I didn't quite calculate through is where they're at the bottom, where they're all stacked on top of each other, that they aren't just meeting. Like the top area, I really like how this is going to go. So that was a Y19, and then this is a YG07, and then a G07. It's kind of a hard jump from the yellow all the way to the blue, so I take 2 steps. I go ahead and hit the YG in there, and then I jump right to blue. My next one is a B28, and that gets that nice bright blue, but this is where you can see where all those colors are at the bottom. BV17's next. Right at that bottom corner. They get pretty muddy because I've added all of them on top of each other. So I take my colorless blender and I do put it in my airbrush, and I'm actually going over some of those joints, kind of right where those colors hit, and it does lighten it up a little bit, and I do it in my airbrush, and that seems to help a little bit. It also helps me see those words again on the card a little better where it says make your own rainbow. So then I'm taking the mask off the little girl, and I do have a little repositionable tape left, and so that's what I'm kind of picking off with my fingers, and I'm going to start on her skin. E000 is the first color I'm using on her skin, and I'm just basing all the skin areas in that, and I'll scoot her up in a second so you can see her legs. E01 is next. Just a nice front bright light. So the shading comes from the underside of her arms, from the side of her face inward, so we give her that round appearance. And like usual, I'm adding little noses, so I do add a little nose. And then E21 is next. Now as we get darker, we use less ink, so I'm just doing the exact same areas but shorter strokes, so it doesn't come out as far onto the legs, onto the arms. I didn't put any of that darker color on the side of her nose either. I just kept it with the light. And then I'm blending back with the E01 and all the way back in with the E000. So hopefully at this point you can see kind of a round shape to her face because it gets darker as it moves away from us at the sides. A little bit of roundness to her arms and to her legs. E04 at the corners of her tongue, and E93 just right in the center to blend that smooth. Then on her hair, I'm basing this with a YR31. I'm trying to keep the colors on her fairly simple since we've got this kind of extreme background going on. She's got a lot of color, and there's a lot of overspray. You can see that because of the way I did that freehand. There's red and blues kind of spraying out into the sky, but I felt like, you know, with a misty rainbow that might work. YR24, I've moved to the tip of my marker, and I am flicking those long strokes going from kind of the bottom up and from the top down. When a image has a little clip like this, it makes it kind of easy because I can also stop at that clip and work in both directions. It just makes it easier to do some of those flicks. I don't have to go quite so long. Gives me that stopping spot. And then E35 is the last color I'm going to use. Now with hair, it's not so much the length of the stroke, it's the number of strokes. So even though some of these strokes will be just as long, or some might even be longer with my darkest color, I'm just going to do fewer of them. The places I'm going to focus in are the hair behind her shoulder is going to get considerably darker. So the stuff that's falling behind her might get a little darker. And up at that center part, it's going to be a little darker. So we're going to see that. I had a couple spots I felt like I didn't get quite enough of that mid-tone, so I just add a few flicks, and then I'm going from the highlight and doing one light pass outward with my lightest color, that YR31. That's just going to soften the texture but not eliminate it. I flicked so fast I got a little outside her head, so I used a little bit of colorless blender, but I'm being really cautious because I don't want to mess up that sky. N1 is what I'm starting with on the marker. I'm trying to make this look a little bit like a Copic, you know. And then filling that bottom part in because obviously she's got one end open, and so I'm going to say that that's the gray end. Adding a little bit of that N1 to her socks as well, kind of white bobby socks or knee-high socks. N3 just down the one side of the marker, kind of the bottom edge. Giving it a little more shape to that gray end of the marker as well. Blending that smooth with N1. And then I will do a little bit with the colorless blender as well, because I'm trying to keep that body a little bit brighter. So keeping that highlight area white. Down the center of those socks, and those I just added the N1. I want the socks to look white. I'm just adding that touch of shading on there. I used the R29 on the tip of the marker and then the end of the marker where we're going to see that color cap, and I used a little bit of colorless blender. Now I'm going to go back and forth a little bit because I want this to look like it's shiny, and so I'm leaving that bright white highlight, and I do end up, of course, I've pushed the red a little too far, and so I'm going to have to do a little bit of correcting. But, you know, that's what you get with Copics. So RV63 is next, and I'm kind of coloring in her pinafore and her shoes. Mom's got her all dressed up matchy-matchy today. Then I've got RV66 is going to come in and try to hit some of those folds. Now this is a fairly big jump, and there's really no marker that's in between. So if you have this series, this is your option. So once I get that wet with my lighter color, I come back in with my darker color and flick out onto that wet ink and then blend one more time. So the back and forth really helps with this particular color combination. They blend well, they just take a little more work. Hitting those shoes and leaving that kind of lighter highlight, but this time it's with that RV versus a white. And then coloring her little clip. Adding a little bit of gray to her sleeve and colorless blender, and then see at the N3 into the pleats of her skirt and adding some cast shadows under her arms. Hitting some of those little touch-up places right at the top of her head and the top of the marker. Again, trying to be really careful because I'm trying to keep that sky intact. So just doing that really lightly and in small amounts at a time. As much as anything, I'm just trying to make it less noticeable versus trying to erase it. It's not going to erase it completely, but I'm going to try to make it less noticeable. So this is going to be that YG07. It's really bright, but you know what? For this, it's going to work. And I'm working with what I have on my table in front of me. So I'm going to head over and I'm going toward that rainbow. And again, this was like, I had no game plan here. I was just trying to see if I could make this work. And so I'm trying to kind of lightly flick out into those colors. This is that G07 to add kind of a shadow underneath her, just darken that area. And I realize at this point I've gone a little too far. Soften the edge with a YG07 of the shadow. Kind of smooth some of those areas out a little bit. And then I'm going to come in with my colorless blender and soften some of those edges where the green hits the rainbow color. And I realize I do too much like all at once. One of those mistakes that I tell my classes never to do. Do a small amount of colorless blender and then come back. And so I have to add more green. And I add more green. So that was the YG07 and G07, and I'm flicking out into the color and then coming back with colorless blender. But this time I don't add too much. Thank you so much for joining me this week. I really do appreciate you guys stopping by. If you haven't had a chance, go ahead and like the channel, and that way you will get a little note in your inbox each Wednesday with a new video when I upload one. If you also are interested in live classes, go over to my blog at scrapweaver.com or over to our Facebook page at Copic in the Craft Room. Thank you so much for joining me this week, and thank you to Stamp AnnieThing for this adorable stamp. Hope you learned a little bit about using an airbrush for a background, and we'll stop by again next week. Have a happy, colorful week.